Avatar is a 2009 film written and directed by James Cameron. Jake Sully, a disabled ex-Marine, is hired by an interplanetary corporation and quasi-government entity called Resources Development Administration. Jake travels to Pandora, an alien world, to control an artificially created life form called an avatar, meant to resemble the native population of Pandora called the Na'vi. His assignment is to learn how to make the Na'vi move from their sacred home so that the RDA can mine for unobtainium, a rare and highly valuable superconductor. Jake learns the ways of the Na'vi and in doing so falls in love with Neytiri and wants to protect their culture. Eventually, RDA's private security forces become restless, give up on Jake's attempts to peacefully remove the Na'vi, and attempt to forcibly remove them. Jake unites the tribes of Pandora and successfully fends off RDA. He finds a way to permanently live on Pandora as his avatar. The forces of RDA leave the planet and all is right in the universe. James Cameron claimed he drew inspiration from every piece of science fiction he ever read, and perhaps because of that, Avatar's themes and messaging swirl into some kind of all-purpose allegory. It lacks the focus to be positive commentary, and it lacks the story structure to prop up its lofty, righteous declarations. The most obvious parallel in the film is that of the Na'vi and Native Americans. Perhaps not real Native Americans, but Hollywood's long-standing interpretation of them. They are driven from their homes by a more technologically advanced group for their resources. Cameron has acknowledged that this parallel was by design. But Avatar is also about America's war on terror, particularly in Iraq, at the time of the film's release. Cameron has admitted to this as well, but it is not subtle. There are explicit references to it in the dialogue in which characters say they must fight terror with terror, and use the term shock and awe, a term predating the war but popularized in the American consciousness in the build-up to the invasion of Iraq. There is more, but that's not really what I want to talk about. I don't care that it borrows from other films. The phrase, "this is just Fern Gully in space," and its variants have been used ad nauseum, and I feel like this misunderstands how art is both made and how it is informed by previous art. It is not a negative that it borrows from other works. All films do in varying degrees. The problem is that it borrows bad ideas, most notably that of the white savior. Jake Sully is the white savior, a character in fiction who rescues people of color from their aggressors or their plight. In spite of the fact that the white savior learns about another culture, and in turn himself, this trope casts the white outsider as the hero and removes agency from the non-white characters. Writing a story about racial harmony loses its bite when the white savior is the real hero. Such films insinuate that people of color have no ability to rescue themselves from plague or aliens or white people who are not the savior. American films starring people of color rescuing themselves from disaster and bondage are actually less common than white savior films. This has the effect of making white audiences feel comfortable about seeing otherwise mistreated people of color and good about themselves by portraying the honest white savior as a benevolent messiah instead of a conqueror. Its bonus offensive feature is that it depicts people of color as helpless weaklings, all the while nestling this in the veneer of liberation. In Avatar, it is Jake who unites the tribes and rescues the Na'vi. Here's a small sampling of 30 such films to save time, but there are a legion of others. If you have never noticed this in film or literature, it is because it has become so ingrained in Western stories, especially American stories, that it's practically a genre more than a trope. One might say that it is still well-meaning, but the fact that it is in so many movies says a lot about how Hollywood wants to portray people. This is particularly damaging when it reimagines historical events, or in Avatar's case, allegorical history, to cast a more positive and frankly duplicitous light on colonialism and slavery. Here's one example. Historians have demonstrated that slaves were crucial agents in their liberation, but white savior films, even well-meaning fare like Steven Spielberg's Lincoln, showcase only faithful servants and helps perpetuate the false notion that African Americans offered little to their own emancipation. White savior films have become notorious because, intentional or not, they reinforce to their target audience the outdated assumption that white men are the primary changers of history and the predominant source of social progress. It's common for historians to argue with Hollywood over details, some of which may not be important. But when it comes to this trope, the problem is not factual accuracy, but interpretive choice. Bear in mind that white savior films do not need to be about historical events. Dangerous Minds is a white savior film, just a different breed. The strange thing is that this widely derided practice is not hiding in a shadowy corner of the motion picture industry. It is right there at the megaplex as well as front and center on the allegedly progressive Oscar night. One common part of the white savior narrative is going native, allowing the white savior and indeed the white audience a vicarious, voyeuristic thrill of becoming part of another culture, effectively appropriating it. Avatar is perhaps the most literal example of this in modern cinema because Jake Sully quite literally becomes a Na'vi, first temporarily early in the film and then permanently at the end. Nobody likes a tourist. Yes, the Na'vi are not literal people of color. They are not even human, but let's not be pedantic. They are made to be stand-ins really, for conquered racial minorities. We can't draw noticeable comparisons between Avatar and Dances with Wolves and the Na'vi to the Native Americans, while in the same breath claim that this film is exempt from this particular criticism. Let's not be willfully ignorant about this. Avatar prominently displays a common feature in white savior narratives: the noble savage. This is typically a character that, due to their race or ethnicity, is a member of a barbaric tribe but is also, at times, honorable. The use of the noble savage caricature often attempts to cut off criticism of the underlying white savior story, even though the whole film is about a white man who saves the natives. It reduces native populations to these simplistic characteristics in service to the white savior narrative. The white savior is not just an outsider, a stranger in a strange land. He is portrayed as better than those he is saving. Avatar is the story of a white man who not only embeds himself in an indigenous tribe, entirely oblivious to their culture at first, but very quickly becomes its primary protector. Jake Sully, in a matter of months, lands on Pandora, learns all their secrets, becomes this uber Na'vi, unites the clans, and saves the population. Jake is the only one who can successfully pray to the Na'vi mother goddess. She hears Jake, but not her own people's prayers and struggles. The white savior trope is so widespread that varied intercultural and interracial relations are sometimes guided by a logic that racializes and separates people into those who are saviors, whites, and those who need saving, non-whites. This enables the interpretation that non-white people and non-white culture is essentially broken, and whites can emerge as messianic characters who can easily solve such problems. Filmmakers, and even some critics, present these films as straightforward, unbiased narratives about heroic, colorblind characters overcoming challenges that threaten the white and non-white characters in equal measure. Because the white savior narrative is so normalized as common sense for white audiences that many fail to recognize these films as ideological. Defenders trot out cyclical non-arguments like, well, if you recognized the racism, that means you're more racist than the movie, in a desperate attempt to turn the tables. But let's be real here, the white savior narrative occurs so often that it can't be ignored. And it is so popular and so unchallenged that a movie like Avatar can have the biggest box office gross of all time. I want one thing to be clear: a movie being problematic does not instantly label it as bad. Of course, but some issues are worse than others. And even if someone personally does not see historical and racial insensitivity as a negative, I struggle to think of how it could be ever argued as a positive without revealing some of that aforementioned racism. Some movies are so great that they at least overshadow some uncomfortable elements. Avatar is not such a film. I know, Avatar sucks for a lot of reasons, and maybe 8 years later people are tired of hearing about its CG and unobtainium and even the subject of this video, but with the sequel coming out next year, allegedly, and a barrage of further sequels afterwards, again allegedly, we may have to start thinking about Avatar again. It was a tastemaker at the time, and if Cameron's sequels hit big, all of this may be the future. Hi everyone, if you like what I do, consider clicking on the orange Patreon link below. That's how this show happens. It's also a way for you to request an episode, so check it out.